Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Lev Grossman.
And I'm Shana Grossman.
And on behalf of the David Abraham Grossman Fund for Social Justice, we would like to welcome you to our second annual Fall Fundraiser. We are very grateful to be here tonight as we raise much-needed funds to support law graduates seeking to build a career in public interest law in honor of our father's professional legacy. We want to thank all of you for helping us to realize this goal.
Our dad had a long career here at Harvard Law School and was very passionate about his work as an advocate for social justice. During his time here, first at the Legal Services Center and later as the director of the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, he represented hundreds of individuals and families facing eviction and foreclosure and trained hundreds of Harvard Law students to do the same. Many of them are here tonight, including our keynote speaker, Congressman Joe Kennedy.
In 2008, at the beginning of the foreclosure crisis, he drafted my sister and me to attend weekly meetings at City Life Vita Urbana, a grassroots community organization in Jamaica Plain and honoree here tonight. At City Life, we aided our dad and his students as they helped advise the flood of people being thrown out of their homes.
This is when we first met Congressman Kennedy, although to us back then he was Joe, one of the fierce student attorneys at the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau.
On Saturday mornings, we canvassed the streets of Boston with our father and his students. Congressman Kennedy and many of those here tonight still participated and still participate in this effort called Project No One Leaves, where residents facing eviction are both informed of their legal rights and assisted in fighting for their homes.
With our dad, we marched in the streets and in front of foreclosed properties with lots of members of the anti-foreclosure and eviction movement and learned how people power can bring about a positive change for families in crisis.
This activist advocate spirit that drove our father, which he instilled in us and that is still embodied in the legal advocates and community activists being honored here tonight, is what the David Abraham Grossman Fund for Social Justice is all about.
We have a wonderful program lined up for you tonight. We are thrilled that an enthusiastic supporter of the DAG Fund, a former student of our dad's, and in our opinion, the most competent member of the House of Representatives, Congressman Joe Kennedy is our keynote speaker.
Founding member of the DAG Fund for Social Justice, former student of our dad's, and legal advocate at Community Justice Project in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Mario Macher will share a few words about the DAG Fund mission.
Our second DAG Fund fellow, Rebecca Donaldson, is here to introduce herself and tell us about the work she will be spearheading in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, using her DAG Fund fellowship.
And we are thrilled to honor community partners, activists, and legal advocates, along with our first DAG Fund fellow, Joey Mikalakis, who worked collectively to successfully keep 59 families facing unjust evictions in their homes for the next 50 years. Amazing.
Please watch this video in which our first DAG Fund fellow, Joey Mikalakis, shares an overview of his impressive year as the DAG Fund fellow and introduces some of our honorees as they discuss their role in the complicated legal battle that is In Re Oru Lawrence.
My first year out of law school, I spent the year doing community-based work in housing law and employment law. On the housing side, mostly working with tenants associations and tenants fighting gentrification in collaboration with City Life Vita Urbana and other grassroots organizations to try and fight displacement in Greater Boston. And on the employment side, mostly taking on wage and hour cases in the restaurant industry and the construction industry. And I take direction from the community in terms of the kinds of cases that I take and the kinds of legal strategies I use to develop those cases. And I think on another level, it's an ethic in terms of the way that you practice. I try to think about lawyering not just as giving good advice, but also building capacity for self-advocacy and for sort of tailoring both the advice that I give and the legal strategies that I use toward building that in my clients, towards making my clients the best equipped self-advocates they can be as well. Definitely leaning on organizers and leaning on community groups to take the lead on that front and to help me and to build capacity where they can. I think it's client empowerment, and it's leaning a lot on the community, and especially grassroots groups that represent the community.
Since August of 2015, this landlord, he's been going downstairs in the basement, turning off the lights on me. I've been going back and forth to the city, complaining about the lights being off, the heat's been off in the wintertime. I had a sleep with hat, jacket, and everything. 3 or 4 comforters on in the wintertime. He turned my lights off and he turned hot water off.
Every time we ask him to fix something, he don't want to fix it.
The landlord was cross-metering, so the tenants didn't have heat and hot water or appropriate heat and hot water. The conditions of the building itself were in disrepair. He was unavailable, the landlord. He would not respond to any complaints.
Some of the units had been cut up in pieces without proper governmental approval. They had extension cords running from one apartment to another to supply power. The city had been involved in terms of a catalog of violations.
It came out, because the tenants didn't even realize this, that the landlord had been in bankruptcy for about 2.5 years. And so when that was out there, that was when the plans sort of started coming together. And really it was Lauren Song and Matt Nickel who did the initial sort of legal strategizing and sort of thinking about how this could happen. They reached out to Bob Sabol, who does bankruptcy, who knows bankruptcy, who made the connection with Pillsbury and Jones Day and Goulston Stores to make sure that we had a team who would be equipped to potentially pursue these buildings in bankruptcy.
I want to find out what more are my rights on this type of situation I was in. Because bankruptcy is like you don't know who's going to take over, and I was getting a little scared. I was upset, I was very angry, I was confused, because I didn't know what was going to happen, I didn't know what to do.
Steve Meacham contacted me and said, there's this building, we don't know much about it, but Greater Boston Legal Services is already representing 3 tenants in this building, and we think the landlord is in a declared bankruptcy, and we think there's something that's worth organizing there. So I went there, and I think from that time on, I was in these buildings at least once a week for 5 months.
We got involved and we started to craft a strategy. And the first part of the strategy was not to let this debtor do what he wanted to do, which seemed at its core to wipe away claims completely by tenants for inhabitable conditions, for violations of zoning laws, for improperly constructed apartments. The strategy we constructed worked phenomenally well because ultimately this debtor got dispossessed of control of his own assets, and we got a trustee appointed.
The plan was put on hold. A Chapter 11 trustee was appointed, again, a neutral third party, not involved in the case, somebody who's subject to court oversight, who's supposed to come in and try to figure out what was going on there. And that really gave us an opportunity to work with the trustee, work with, again, someone who is supposed to do equity.
We had to show that we had literally millions of dollars of claims against the landlord. And Joey was one of the key people that put together the legal theories that that he owed us, owed our clients all of this money.
With the assistance of your fellow, Joey Michalakis, and the GBLS staff, the tenants were each interviewed and their claims assessed and considered and aggregated so that there was a huge bundle of claims that were worth about $3 million.
These were people in really dire straits who were willing to spend a lot of time being interviewed and get their affidavits together. They were willing to put their name on a document explaining what had been done to them and why it was wrong. They were really willing to take a stand.
The tenants were willing to waive their legal claims against the landlord as a way to add value to a bid from a nonprofit.
These people said, we'll invest in our future with our claims.
Mi nombre es Sabol, soy una de las organizadoras de la comunidad de la organización que quiere comprar el edificio para que las rentas se queden para la comunidad.
The court could take into account the claims of our clients as part of the bid. And so I don't remember the numbers, but let's say that we were willing to bid $2 million, but we were going to give up, our clients were going to give up $3 million worth of claims. So the question is, could the judge treat this as a $2 million bid or as a $5 million bid? And Joan Pillsbury argued brilliantly that it should be a $5 million bid.
The nice thing in the bankruptcy context is when you're talking about return to creditors, which is again that economic focus, you can improve the return to all creditors either by getting more money or by reducing the claims. So if you come into bankruptcy and you say, I have these claims with this dollar amount, and in connection with this path forward, I'm going to release my claims, well, you've just improved the return to creditors. And that has real value to it.
So that's what we're fighting for, a nonprofit to get these apartments and for them to have affordable rent for a period of 50 years. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. We had rallies in front of Waldeck. Made me feel more confident about myself.
I want to live where I'm at. I like it here. I like it in Fields Corner. There's a lot of generations within this city of mine, you know, and we shouldn't be forced out or displaced.
I don't see why we should get penalized when building owners fail, why tenants need to get penalized. And just to let you know, I came from the hospital to this apartment, so I've been here for 41 years. That's my age, and I don't feel that I should go anywhere.
That's right.
I remember the courtroom being full of tenants, and they were all wearing these lime green shirts, and I'm just really hoping for the best for them.
It turns out at the bankruptcy hearing, there was three contenders.
And Codman was the only developer who said, we want to maintain this property as low income and affordable, and we want to keep all of the tenants where they are currently. We just want to make the property habitable, essentially.
I made this point of the argument that, Your Honor, there are some things that are more important than money. And there was a sudden commotion and a cheer went up from the back of the courtroom, and I realized that there were numerous of the tenants in the back of the courtroom wearing bright yellow t-shirts with slogans on them, and I've actually never had an audience cheer for me before in court. It was a really special moment.
I have cheered for him after court.
That's right. But again, that level of, you talk about why one does pro bono, a corporation doesn't give you a hug. right? These were people whose lives were being fundamentally changed, and so much for courtroom decorum. They let everybody know that they were in support of the argument.
Together with Grossman and Storrs, we were able to convince the judge that the dollars from Codman plus the waivers of these claims exceeded in value the cash component of another bidder.
When it was awarded to Codman, the entire room erupted in cheers, and it literally brought chills to I had chills and tears were in my eyes. I felt like I was a part of something that was really big.
Folks were empowered by this success. And so not only are their circumstances, hopefully living circumstances, improved, but I think their community strength is improved because they understand what they can do as a group when they constructively take on powers that are otherwise market forces that seem very difficult to tame, and in this case they did.
I'm impressed with them. They come and have a guy come and clean it every day.
These buildings now are secure for another 50 years for affordable housing.
Public interest lawyers are important to people like me or anybody who has low income, who I'm on disability. I couldn't afford lawyers are expensive, and I couldn't afford a lawyer. And evidently they work with the tenants of these the buildings that are owned by Will Lawrence to make sure they get the proper representation. And they did it for free, and they were good. I was impressed. They really cared. Their heart was into it.
We also couldn't have done this without our experts who gave color and numbers to these claims. Retired Superior Court Judge King, who presided over numerous landlord-tenant disputes, was able to give his opinion to the bankruptcy court judge about the validity of these claims. Ethan Maskey was able to describe for the judge the egregious conditions. He's a sanitation expert.
And when you see the client caring and having so much of themselves put into the case, you feel sort of inspired yourself to put that much in as well, to sort of be there with them. And I think Joey and the team at GBLS was probably the best embodiment of that, and that they were the ones really on the front lines, directly in contact with the tenants, sort of helping them as problems arose.
Andrew and I were able to contribute a lot of firm resources, but this wouldn't have happened without the support of Greater Boston Legal Services, without the support of the DAG Fund, and its and Joey's role in particular. People who are out there able to do well, to do good for society, and to get the support of society that they deserve in order to make a difference that benefits all of us.
I don't think it's any exaggeration to say that if Joey hadn't been there, if Joey hadn't had that funding, we might have had to just take a pass on this and say it's important, but we just don't have the capacity.
It's so wonderful that there's money available, that there's resources out there for people to do this kind of work. And in a time when legal services funding as a whole is under threat, both the explicit threat of potential budget cuts at the federal level, and also just state budgets, constantly being as strapped and as tight as they are. I think we need all the help that we can get. And I think having funds out there specifically to help lawyers build power in marginalized communities that have been disempowered for generations, it's extremely meaningful. It's extremely powerful. And I think any lawyer who wants to make a difference, who wants to spend their career forming relationships with communities and forming relationships with clients and community organizations, that can potentially, change the world, I think it's an incredible opportunity.
Good evening. I'm Stacy Grossman. Widow of David Abraham Grossman and founding member of the DAG Fund for Social Justice. The DAG Fund's aim is to extend my husband's professional legacy by providing an annual $50,000 fellowship to a law graduate seeking to build a career as a community lawyer. And we couldn't be more proud of our first fellow, Joey Michalakis. Unfortunately, Joey couldn't be here this evening. He's at his best friend's wedding. But I think our video clearly gives you a sense of the impactful social justice work that Joey was a part of this past year as a DAG Fellow. And I would be remiss if I didn't take this opportunity to thank Greater Boston Legal Services for taking Joey under their wing, providing him with an office, mentorship, and at the conclusion of his fellowship, offering him a full-time job. We are so proud to have been a part of launching Joey's public interest law career, and we couldn't have done it without Greater Boston Legal Services. So thank you. Our video also highlighted the In Re Oru Lawrence case, a stunning legal community effort which Joey was a part of that transformed lives for the better. In Re Oru Lawrence is a story about egregious injustice in which men, women, and children found themselves on the brink of homelessness. But it's also a story about empowerment. It's about individuals coming together and choosing to speak out about injustice. And it's about legal advocates and community partners with bankruptcy and housing expertise, with people networks, and with financial resources who listened to those outcries and made the conscious choice to care and collectively align and fight with families for fairness. It is my distinct privilege to be able to honor this dream team of community activists, partners, and righteous lawyers. And by the way, you don't hear often in a sentence, righteous and lawyer, which is really too bad because the lawyers that I know and the lawyers that we're honoring here tonight are heroes. Heroes who successfully staved off the evictions of 59 families and secured for them safe, affordable housing for the next 50 years. The In Re Oru Lawrence case began with the grassroots powerhouse City Life Vida Urbana, who identified this big housing crisis and empowered tenants to organize and protest so that their grievances would be heard. Our first award, our first DAG Fund award, goes to Chuck Guy Carey, lead tenant activist of City Life Vida Urbana. Come on up, Chuck. Heeding the cries of injustice, community lawyers stepped in to help. Our next DAG Fund award goes to Head Ehrlich, who was one of the first lawyers on the scene, spending countless hours collecting tenants' grievances and organizing a case. Did you get one with me and Chuck? Okay, please. Lauren Song of GBLS was another first legal responder. Unfortunately, she could not be here tonight, but we will make sure she gets her award. It was soon discovered that many of the aggrieved tenants received rent subsidies through a Boston Public Health Commission program. Our next award goes to Tim Harrington, Deputy General Counsel of Boston Public Health Commission, who stepped up to represent BPHC clients to strengthen their case against landlord Oru Lawrence. Tim Harrington. Mimi Brown, General Counsel for Boston Public Health Commission, worked with tenants to gather information to build their affidavits. Please come up, Mimi Brown. Bob Sabol of GBLS took the lead on figuring out that Oru Lawrence, the landlord of disrepute, had actually filed for bankruptcy without letting his tenants know. Bob then reached out to pro bono attorneys at big firms with resources and bankruptcy expertise to help with strategy and legal argument. Please come up, Bob Sabol. Our next award goes to John Hanafy, bankruptcy litigator with the law firm of Jones Day, who heeded Bob's call and lent his time and resources to crafting strategy that helped to monetize tenants' claims. Please come on up, John Hanafy. Eric Dowdy, bankruptcy lawyer from Jones Day, also played an important role in coming up with a winning strategy that would protect tenants from being displaced. Please come on up, Eric. Our next award goes to Andrew Troupe, partner at Pillsbury Winthrop Shaw Pittman, who helped craft legal argument that would persuade the judge to ultimately sell the bankrupt properties to a neighborhood land trust. Please come up, Andrew Troupe. Chris Myrick, a partner at Pillsbury, breathed persuasive life into the legal strategy by arguing it in court before the judge and ultimately getting the win for the tenants. Please come up, Chris Myrick. expert witness and public health inspector Ethan Mascoop, who was always David's go-to expert, provided compelling testimony of the dangerous living conditions tenants endured and helped to quantify the collateral damage. Please come up, Ethan Mascoop. Our next award goes to Codman Square Neighborhood Development Corporation for their successful bid on the bankrupt properties and for their commitment to restoring them and keeping them affordable. Will the folks from Codman please come up to receive this award? I also have an award recognizing Wynn Management for their agreement to help Codman with the restoration and management of the properties. The folks of Wynn could not be here tonight, but we will make sure that they will receive their award. Please join me in a standing round of applause for this social justice dream team. What an inspiring feat. Thank you. It is now my great privilege to introduce to you our keynote speaker, Massachusetts Congressman Joseph P. Kennedy III. But before I welcome him to the podium, I'd like to share a little bit about Congressman Kennedy and offer some personal reflections. Congressman Kennedy, as you might know, comes from a rich family history of political service. He is grandson of former U.S. Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy, great-nephew of former U.S. President John F. Kennedy and former U.S. Senator Ted Kennedy, and his father, Joe Kennedy II, served as a member of the House of Representatives for 12 years. Congressman Kennedy has an undergraduate degree in management science and engineering from Stanford University, a JD from Harvard Law School, served in the Peace Corps in the Dominican Republic, speaks fluent Spanish, is married to health policy advocate Lauren, is the proud father of Eleanor, or Ellie, and is expecting a new member to his family in a couple of weeks. He is currently serving his third term representing the 4th District, my district, of Massachusetts. Okay. He's on the influential House Energy and Commerce Committee and has effectively worked on the passage of bipartisan initiatives. And I'm going to say that again because, honestly, I don't think this is happening anymore. Congressman Kennedy successfully garnered bipartisan support and advanced passage of his Revitalize American Manufacturing and Innovation Act, his Perkins Modernization Act, and his STEM Gateways Act, all of which support access to educational opportunities and new technologies, particularly for low and moderate income students, and promote growth in STEM and STEM-related industry. Congressman Kennedy is an emerging leader on mental health and substance use disorder issues and is an outspoken advocate for the protection and strengthening of quality, affordable health care for all. Just a few weeks ago, on November 1st, during open enrollment for Health Insurance Day, he tweeted, "None of us are invincible, and one day we will all rely on the mercy of our healthcare system. Get covered now at healthcare.gov." And speaking of Twitter, if our tweeter-in-chief's tweets are getting you down, I really strongly encourage you to visit Congressman Kennedy's Twitter account. I find his tweets to be a welcome voice of hope and level-headedness, particularly on issues of social justice. And let me give you just one example. This past summer, on July 26, without any contextual debate, President Trump tweeted, "The United States government will not accept or allow transgender individuals to serve in any capacity in the U.S. military." Like countless others, I was outraged by this tweet and filled with worry about what this meant for the LGBTQ rights and for civil rights in general. So I looked at Congressman Kennedy's Twitter account for his reaction. There, I watched him deliver an impassioned speech to the members of the House, which concluded with these powerful words: "To the thousands of brave transgender men and women serving today in uniform, please know that a grateful nation does not take your service, your patriotism for granted. You deserve better from your president. You deserve better from your government. You deserve better from your country." I was immediately comforted to know that my congressman's sentiments were in alignment with how I felt, but more importantly, were in alignment with the zeitgeist of this nation. In just 3 short terms, Representative Kennedy's record is impressive, and he has clearly shown himself to be a capable and effective leader. But what I am most compelled about our keynote speaker is that he leads with a compassionate heart. I first heard about Joe Kennedy when he was a student of David's at the Harvard Legal Aid Bureau, or H-Lab. When David spoke to me about Joe, he often referred to him as the Guten Hashama, a Yiddish expression meaning good heart. Joe's years at H-Lab were particularly challenging, as it was during the 2008 financial crisis when thousands of families were left in economic ruin and facing foreclosure and eviction. Joe worked side by side with my husband, fellow H-Lab student advocates, and H-Lab staff, many of whom are here tonight, as they did their best to keep working families in their homes. Joe was a devout volunteer for the Lawyer for the Day program on Thursday mornings at Housing Court, where he offered free legal counsel to folks facing displacement. And because he was one of the few students who spoke Spanish, he was sorely needed. And so Joe often skipped classes on Thursday mornings so that he could be of service to people in crisis. A Guten Hashama. Joe was also known to give out his cell phone number to anyone he met in need of assistance, and thus he received and took phone calls all hours of the day and night. A Guten Hashama. He even offered to lend his truck to one of his clients who needed a vehicle to take his driver's test. a guten hashama. While the world seemed to be on the brink of financial ruin in 2008, personally, David and I felt that we were on the brink of ruin as we learned that David had cancer. He underwent surgery, and as soon as he was healed, he insisted on going back to work, even though he had months of chemotherapy ahead of him. I reluctantly agreed. He was too weak to drive, so I drove him to H-Lab. On his first day back, when I arrived to pick him up, a tall, red-headed student held onto David and walked him to his car. It was the Guten Hashama. Joe leaned in to introduce himself to me and thanked me for taking care of David and expressed how much David's health and well-being meant to him. He expressed that same admiration for David before Congress shortly after David died. A gift to Lev, Shana, and me that we will forever be grateful for. On the car ride home that day, David was triumphant. He had beaten back cancer and had returned to H-Lab doing what he loved. He confided to me that he hoped Joe would run for office one day. He said, "Stacy, wouldn't it be nice to have a political leader who is a Guten Hashama?" Yes, David, it is. Dearest guest, it's my pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker, House Representative of the 4th District of Massachusetts, Congressman Joe Kennedy.
Stacy, after that, I think I should just walk off stage. Thank you for your extremely kind and moving words, for the invitation to join you and your family here tonight, for an unbelievable introduction that I have no doubt Dave never would have said to my face. Ever. Most importantly, I want to thank you for sharing Dave with all of us. He was and is still a gift. He spent more than his fair share of time roaming the halls of the Legal Aid Bureau, teaching, guiding, mentoring, even talking some of us out of some really dumb ideas. The hours that he spent with us, countless students, I know some of whom are here, meant less time with those he loved most. All of us have the incredible privilege of his example, his decency, and the transformational experience of knowing him, not just for who he was, but because of your generosity and that of your family as well. For that, we do owe you and Lev and Shana a debt that we can never repay. Thank you to the three of you. And to Lev and Shana, thank you for the kind words as well. I did notice that you said the most competent of the House of Representatives. An important qualifier there. But nevertheless, thank you. When I think of Dave, words that come to mind, probably similar for many of you. Brilliant, teacher, leader, tough, champion, stubborn, kind, humble. He'd probably want me to add basketball. Another student wrote of Dave, quote, "You changed my life. Not in that overused cliche, isn't it a nice thing to say kind of way, but in the truest sense of the words. I am a different person because of you. And I'm among countless others. All of those words are true, and they're still not enough. Because of his legacy, a legacy that is alive in all of us today, it is so much more than words can do justice, no matter how poetic, or poignant, or powerful. It's measured in the tangible, the things we can see, we can touch, and that we know. Homes saved, community strengthened, families healed, unemployment benefits reclaimed, students inspired, and values made real. It's in the families laughing together over dinner, with a roof over their heads, and joy in their hearts, thanks to David Grossman. Many of us here tonight were lucky enough to see that firsthand. I came to law school out of the Peace Corps, having spent 2.5 years in some pretty tough conditions in the Dominican Republic. And over the course of my service there, I saw how critical the law can be for remedying injustice, and yet how impotent it is when not enforced. I came to law school to try to figure that out, how it could be both so powerful and so weak, so absolute and steadfast, and yet so human. You all can imagine how disappointed I was that I didn't find that answer in our legal writing class. I had just come out of this extraordinarily important experience, personal experience. And there I was, surrounded by the smartest people I had ever met, enmeshed in these academic debates whose outcome seemed so disconnected from the vivid reality I had just left. I wanted and I needed answers to those questions, and I couldn't find them in a law book. So I looked for more. Someone pointed me towards 23 Everett Street and Dave Grossman. They told me that my time at the Legal Aid Bureau would be a relatively minor weekly commitment that would no way interfere with my coursework or social life. Thank you very much to the faculty and staff that are here today, perpetuating that slight exaggeration. I remember the moment that I was hooked. It was during our orientation with the Legal Aid Bureau. Dave had the courage to take about 20 Harvard Law students and walk us through Dorchester. We stuck out, kind of like a redhead in the Dominican Republic. You could feel the awkwardness walking down the street. A privileged group walking streets of folks who were anything but. But what I remember to this day was how at ease Dave was. He was with his people. I had just seen from the Peace Corps that that connection does not come easily for a community that one seeks to serve, for them to have confidence in you. You face suspicion, divide of culture, history, and shared experience that can be insurmountable. But not for Dave. He had it. That trust. And he had earned it. And he had done it the hard way, the only way, by showing up day after day, case after case, demonstration after demonstration. No shortcuts, not for Dave. A trust that was strengthened by the knowledge that Dave could have done whatever he wanted to do with a legal talent that he had in any courtroom across this country for any fee that he chose. And yet he chose to show up to every Tenants Association meeting, every attorney for the day table, every protest, every demonstration, every time he was needed, and so many more times when his presence was just appreciated. For a community that had been left behind by so many for so long, whose contact with our justice system can be anything but just, who is used to having a system fail them, Dave refused to do the same. And it was the first big lesson that he taught us by his example, not through any book or lecture. And as lawyers, we are pledged to serve a justice system built not just on the promise of the law, a promise that our society makes to us, that we make to each other. That we will be treated fairly, whether we are weak or strong, good or bad, rich or poor. But that promise itself is not self-executing. It is only true if people who care show up. Far too often today, no one shows up for the people that need it most. Our country's commitment to civil legal aid is bone thin. Taking inflation into account, the amount of funding provided to the Legal Services Corporation in 2013 was the lowest it has ever been in its 40-year history. We spent more as a society on Halloween costumes for our pets in 2014 than the Legal Services Corporation could afford on basic field grants. To update those figures to this year, we spent, as a society, $300 million more watching Conor McGregor fight Floyd Mayweather than LSC can put forth. Only 1/5 of low-income Americans can access the legal assistance they qualify for. 71% of low-income households experienced at least one civil legal problem in the past year. Healthcare, housing, disability access, veterans benefits, domestic violence. So the question for all of us, for those of us here and many others elsewhere, is how do we respond to a systemic inequity? How do we continue Dave's work? Legal community, yes, some anyway, have recognized the shortfall. And we are starting to rally behind that cause. Dean Martha Minow has led a study in Massachusetts that exposed the extent of the problem here and has championed the cause nationally, helping lead the Legal Services Corporation towards strategic partnerships. We now have data on innovative initiatives like medical legal partnerships, community health centers, and we're starting to leverage technology like machine learning algorithms for automatic translation services. Leaders like Chief Justice Gantz in Massachusetts and Chief Justice Hecht in Texas have been using their platforms to elevate this cause. You're able to found a bipartisan caucus in Congress to advocate for more federal funding to raise the profile of the issue in Washington. All of those things are helpful, and all of them are necessary, and we will keep going forward on all of those aspects. But they are no replacement for the Dave Grossmans of the world. And thankfully, and so unsurprisingly, we still have Stacy. Through her vision, along with Lev and Shana, the DAG Fund keeps Dave's legacy alive on the streets of Boston. Like our DAG Fund fellow, Joey, who you've heard of, and his peers in that Oru Lawrence case, pouring through case files and I'm sure way too many nights of bad takeout, standing strong in a courtroom. They not only gave 59 families the security of a safe place to rest their head, but the guarantee that no one can take it from them for the next 50 years. And so, Becca Donaldson, we're counting on you too. This year's DAG Fellow will undoubtedly continue that record and ensure that our justice system remains a safe haven for survivors of sexual assault, not another cog in a cycle of intimidation and broken promises. Thank you for continuing this work. This work, their efforts, our efforts, Dave's efforts, have always been wrapped up in one of Dave's favorite phrases. Tikkun olam, repair the world. It's a tall order, but for Dave, could there be anything more worthy, more sacred, any use of skill and time that mattered more. We carry his wisdom with us for the undoubtedly high-stake fights ahead. We remember the best legal lesson that he taught any of us, that our laws matter only as much as we are willing to fight for them. They count only as far as the lives that they reach. Ours is a fragile, imperfect, and deeply human system, but it is the best one we've got. And today, right now, we need to be reaching farther and fighting harder than we ever have before. For a student with disabilities who's denied equal education, for a single mom trying to raise 2 kids and facing eviction, even though she did nothing wrong, for a transgender tenant denied housing with a smile, for a patient battling substance use disorder denied treatment by our insurance company, for a factory worker denied unemployment by a company exporting jobs. Our laws reflect the promises we make. Our justice system reflects the promises we keep. And knowing Dave was knowing how to keep a promise. He might not be with us today, but his promise still stands strong amongst all of us. Stacy.
I'm Marielle Macher, one of Dave's former students. My very first memory of Dave, and still one of my favorites, was in 2009 during our very first week at H-Lab. This week was just meant to be an orientation week where we would start to get familiar with the Boston Housing Court and start to learn what the expectations were at H-Lab. And so during that very first week, Dave took us down to the Boston Housing Court to introduce us to the judges, to show us the courtroom, to start to show us who opposing counsel would be. But Dave, of course, was an absolute celebrity in the Boston Housing Court. It was impossible for him to even step into the courthouse without a whole line of tenants following behind him, asking him for help, pulling him aside, asking if he could take on their case, asking if he would provide some advice. And so, since we were there just for orientation, Dave rushed around, taking us from courtroom to courtroom, and in between telling us, oh, you know, this will be opposing counsel on half your cases, and giving us little tips. He was running back outside the courtroom to talk to tenants, and then rushing right back in to take on their cases after talking to them for just a couple of minutes out in the hallway. And he was amazing. He was absolutely brilliant. He won each of these motions for cases that he had just taken on only a few minutes beforehand. And that was the exact same fierce determination that Dave expected from all of his students. He always pushed us to take on more cases, to work harder, to do our absolute best to serve the poorest communities in Boston. And he really demanded the most that each of his students were capable of. And I certainly benefited enormously from that. And because of Dave's passion and determination and the inspiration that he gave to all of his students, he now has a whole generation of students in legal aid, in public interest careers, doing pro bono in the private sector, working in government jobs, even one in Congress. And he certainly was very pivotal to my own path to legal aid, where I've been working now for several years. And so, although Dave is no longer with us, the fund continues this legacy of inspiring young lawyers to work not just in public interest careers, not just doing legal aid, but using legal aid to really fight for social justice, because that was Dave's absolute passion. And we are so proud that through the DAG Fellowship, we're able to now offer and have offered to Joey and now offered to Rebecca the opportunity to do a one-year fellowship at the very start of their careers to focus on community lawyering projects where they'll use the law and organizing strategies that Dave really was one of the pioneers of to effectuate social change and to fight for impoverished communities. And our hope is that just like the careers of so many young lawyers that Dave impacted, that this fellowship will also build a new generation of young lawyers with a passion for law and organizing who will apply that throughout their careers, just as Dave would have wanted. So with your incredible, generous support, you've seen the incredible work that Joey has done. Rebecca is now at the very start of an amazing project that Dave certainly would have been incredibly, incredibly proud of. And we're very hopeful that we will be able to continue to offer this fellowship in the future to more young lawyers with incredible talent. We hope that your support for the fellowship will continue. It would not have been possible without the incredible generosity that you've shown to the fund. Tonight, if you're able to do so, in all the packets in all the introduction brochures on your table, there's a little card. We'll be collecting further donations. If you're able to give anything more, every dime goes towards supporting the public interest careers of young lawyers, and right back to legal aid and to the clients who need it, and to making sure that Dave's legacy continues into the future. And so with that, I am so proud to turn this over to Rebecca, who is going to share more about her project. And her project is just an absolute tribute to Dave's legacy, and we're so proud of her.
Well, thank you, Marielle. Thank you to all of you so much for being here tonight. I think in light of the amazing honorees who are here, and in light of the powerful words shared by Marielle and Congressman Kennedy and Stacy, I obviously have a very easy task ahead of me. But sincerely, if it weren't for you, I would not have the chance to be this year's Grossman Fund Fellow. I want to tell you all about the project, but first I want to tell you a little bit about how it came to be. This project really began a few years ago when I was a student in another clinic here at the law school, the International Human Rights Clinic, working with Professor Tyler Giannini. Tyler had our team take a look at the international agreement governing global business, which had then been recently finalized. He had us read it and tell him what we thought were the strengths and weaknesses. And then he had us read it again and tell him what he thought, tell him what, he had us read it again. It's getting late, I wanted to keep you on your toes. And this time, he challenged us to read it from the perspective of someone who mined mines for a global corporation, or a neighbor who drank the water from the stream that held the company's runoff. And he asked us, if these individuals had had a seat at the table when this agreement had been signed, is this the agreement they would have wanted? Did this agreement rebalance the asymmetrical power that exists between local communities and global corporations, or did it simply reinforce them? Through this, I began what I hope is a lifelong chance to practice community lawyering. Tyler's introducing these questions to us, as Dave introduced to his students, was a lesson as fundamental to my law school experience as learning what a tort was during 1L. You know that feeling when you learn something new and you start to see it everywhere? I looked back at my work up until that point, as a student and as a professional before law school. And some of that work had dealt with gender violence. I asked myself if I had invited those most affected by the issue to come to the table, and not just talk about, but advocate and influence a particular project or policy. Or had I too perpetuated the fallacy of professional policy advocacy, believing, however subconsciously, that those who are paid to work on an issue, lawyers, policymakers, analysts, and advocates, the educated, the elite, somehow knew best, even better than those who have experienced the challenge in question. If I'm really honest with myself, What I thought was empathizing was actually just assuming. And at the same time, there's some really special challenges that come up when trying to practice community lawyering with those who have experienced gender violence, like domestic violence and sexual assault. Which brings me to the importance of this fellowship in making this work possible. Because of the DAG Fund, the project I'll be working on this year will actually have the chance to think through those challenges and bring victims and survivors of gender violence to the table, particularly those who identify with having experienced sexual assault. Now, my mom raised me with that old adage that at a dinner party, you're not supposed to talk about sex, money, or politics. And talking at a fundraiser about movement building, about sexual assault, is literally all three. But I do want to touch on what some of those challenges are. Foremost, it's difficult to get engaged with your community while publicly identifying as a survivor of gender violence, if it's difficult to identify as a survivor of gender violence in the first place. We're not supposed to talk about our personal situations with money, sex, or politics because they're often deeply personal. They're some of the facets of life that most determine who we are and how we relate to others. And that means that when we talk about them, that leaves us really vulnerable. They reveal our choices or what we didn't have the ability to choose. You risk distance or embarrassment or judgment or possibly a very awkward pause. So to identify openly as someone who's experienced gender violence, you risk all of that. And there's another complicating factor. When I think about my family and friends who have been assaulted or abused and have chosen to share that, all of them knew the person who violated them. All of them trusted the person who violated them, whether it was for a moment or a marriage. And afterward, many of them did not say a word. Even for myself, when people ask why I'm working to end gender violence, almost always I allude to the stories of others. I don't admit that it's happened to me too. We're more uncomfortable with people talking about it than with the fact that it actually happens. But as we've seen recently, the conversation is changing. The Me Too movement in recent weeks has turned a very heavy page in people's willingness to publicly identify as someone who has experienced sexual assault or harassment. As of last count, there have been almost 80 million tweets, Facebook posts, comments, and reactions from at least 85 countries. And the raw number of posts, of course, does not reveal how many people admitted their experience for the first time to their friends and family, or perhaps even to themselves. The decision of whether or not to disclose this information to others can surface a series of questions. Did the incident rise to a level worth noting? Did I do enough to prevent it? Am I just seeing things? They're not just questions you worry other people will ask. They're questions you ask yourself. But that was yesterday, and there have been a lot of yesterdays. And this is today. Now, how can a critical mass of survivors draw upon their experiences to lead change with their employers and educational institutions, with policymakers, and with the public? These questions drive the heart of this project. This year, I've returned home to Milwaukee, and because of the DAG Fund, I've been able to join Legal Action of Wisconsin. With Legal Action, I'm helping develop a pilot project that will provide legal representation to victims of sexual assault. In particular, we'll take on cases when defense counsel requests to view the victim's mental health records. The information from those records is often used to further discredit victims who are not afforded credibility in the first place. And in Wisconsin, when such a request is made, victims can decline to disclose those records, but if they do, they're barred from testifying at trial. And of course, in a lot of sexual assault cases, the victim's testimony is the bulk of the evidence. So without it, the case might not be able to proceed. In other words, faced with such a petition, someone has to choose between handing over what is otherwise totally privileged and confidential records from one of the only protected spaces where they're allowed to speak openly about what happened to them, and potentially subject those conversations to public record, or they risk having their case dropped. Is that actually a choice? Wisconsin is not alone. Many, if not most states, allow some version of this. And because of this, when victims and survivors of sexual assault across the country open up about in a space that they might expect is privileged and safe, one of the only people who can access those private thoughts is this person who made you feel so unsafe in the first place. If those who experience gender violence knew this, would they ever open up to a mental health professional, somebody who might be so instrumental in their healing process? And if someone has actually sought mental health support, if they knew this, would they report? I think back to the questions that Tyler asked us in the clinic and that David no doubt asked his students as well. If those who have experienced sexual assault had had a seat at the table when this rule was established, would they have agreed to this? Does this rule rebalance the asymmetrical power that exists between survivors and their assailants, or does it simply reinforce them? Too often, when someone reports what happened to the police or their school or their employer, they say that pursuing some sort of justice feels like a second assault. In fact, I'd like to meet someone who's reported and doesn't feel that way. And that tells us that the system needs to change. We need to keep making it more and more socially acceptable to admit that you've experienced gender violence, even at dinner parties. And we need to invite survivors to the table to draw upon their experiential expertise and lead the change they wish to see. And will not only lead to a better system of justice, investing your experience so that someone else does not have to go through what you went through can, in itself, restore some of the power that's been taken from you. The DAG Fund Fellowship makes this possible. It's because of this fellowship that this project will be able to intentionally include the intersectional perspectives of victims and survivors into its design, both with clients who are in a place to give feedback and want to do so, and through developing partnerships with community groups, like the one between Greater Boston Legal Services and City Life Vida Urbana. I've also come to appreciate how rare and special this fellowship is since starting work at a legal services organization. You get there and you're handed this big, thick compliance manual, which you think as someone in the legal field, you get all excited about. But what you learn is that, well, there's a lot of good work that you can do. There's a lot of work that you can't. Lobbying, organizing, indeed, some of the very tools that you would want in order to build a movement. And while this project still functions within those bounds, it provides space to someone who's new to the legal field, like myself, to not only provide legal services to those who can't afford them, but it lets us get creative about all of the possibilities that we do have to build relationships. And through those relationships, movements. And through those movements, leaders who are empowered to make the most of what they have, their experience. This is not a project about giving a voice to the voiceless. It's about making room at the table for people to use their voice. So thank you very much for the chance to pursue this project and carry forward this aspect of Dave's work. And thank you so much to Stacy for all of your organizing that makes this fellowship possible.
We are so proud that Rebecca Donaldson is our new DAG Fund Fellow. How incredibly important and timely it is that we are funding a boots-on-the-ground women's advocate to lend her voice and skills to empower survivors of sexual assault and abuse. The kids and I feel extremely blessed to be able to extend David's professional legacy through the DAG Fund for Social Justice. And we are deeply grateful to all of you for your generous support and your attendance here tonight. Thank you. We are grateful to Congressman Kennedy for being our keynote speaker. Thank you, Congressman Kennedy, for your kind words about David and for sharing your powerful voice and vision on creating a more just world. I am so grateful to our honorary event chair, dear friend, and senior partner of Kramer, Levin, Naftalis, and Frankel, Phil Kaufman. And thank you to all of the members of Kramer, Levin for their enthusiastic support of the DAG Fund. Kramer-Levin has a reputation for being a firm that is committed to advancing social justice through pro bono work. It is where David began his career in law, and it's where he and I first met. So it is especially meaningful that Kramer-Levin is our biggest contributor, having donated over $100,000 to the DAG Fund. Amazing. A big thank you to Larry Curtis and Wynn Development for your generous bronze sponsorship. Larry was a frequent guest speaker for David's housing class. When he found out that we were creating this fund, he immediately signed up to help and has been invaluable in generating interest and support. Indeed, Larry reached out to Arthur Wynn, founder of Wynn Companies, and to his colleagues at Keith Construction and Delbrook JKS, and engendered their interest and sponsorship of tonight's fundraiser. So thank you, Larry. Thank you, Arthur Wynn and Wynn Companies. Thank you, Keith Construction. And thank you, Delbrook JKS. Thank you to dear, dear friends Lance and Janie Hoffman, founders of Mama Chia. Your in-kind donation of Mama Chia beverages made our cocktail reception especially delicious, and your continued support and sponsorship of the DAG Fund elevates your friend's legacy. Thank you. Thank you, Pillsbury, Winthrop, Shaw, Pittman, for your sponsorship of tonight's event in honor of partner and honoree Andrew Troupe and honoree and former partner Christopher Myrick. Thank you to Holland and Knight and partner Jeff Middleman for your continued support and commitment to advancing social justice through the DAG Fund. Thank you. Thanks to Tanya Helhosky of Bird Design for creating our logo, our invitations, and our programs. And thanks to videographer Melissa Matthews, AKA Home Fries, for creating our video presentation. I would also like to thank our wonderful host committee and guest ambassadors for their vigorous efforts to get folks to attend tonight's event and for their generous support of the fund. Thank you all. Thank you to Harvard Law School family, Dean Manning, the folks in development who manage our fund, and to the events planning team who put together such a lovely night for us tonight. I would also like to thank and acknowledge former Dean Martha Minow, for her foundational support of the DAG Fund, for earmarking funds to help launch our first fellow, and for her unwavering belief in the necessity of free legal aid for those in need. I would like to thank our speakers, Lev and Shana Grossman. DAG Fund loyalist Marielle Macher, and our current DAG Fund fellow Rebecca Donaldson. And last but certainly not least, I would like to thank from the bottom of my heart the members of the DAG Fund committee. Would you please stand when I call your name? Alana Greer, Sam Levine, Marielle Macher, Adam Myers, Alexa Shebakoff, Nicole Summers, Jennifer Tarr, Patty Whiting, and our new DAG Fund, our last DAG Fund fellow, Joey Mikalakis. The simple truth is that the DAG Fund for Social Justice is you. You willed it into existence, and you have made it the incredible success it is. Thank you. We have only been in existence for 2 years and are on track to close this fiscal year having raised a little more than $600,000, which is amazing. But we still have more fundraising to do if we want to achieve a permanent fellowship. And so even though Marielle already did this, I am going to ask you to take a look at those pledge cards that are inside your programs. And I'd like to encourage you to please fill them out and put them in the baskets on the table to help us get even closer to our ultimate goal of raising $1 million. If you've already made a donation to the DAG Fund, thank you. And in this case, consider taking the pledge card with you as a parting favor. And perhaps you'll make a donation in the coming months or in 2018. Giving money is not the only way you can support the DAG Fund. You can follow us on Facebook, you can talk to friends about us, and you can let us know if you have any good ideas to help us generate interest in what we do. All help is valued and welcome. And as you consider all of this, I would like to leave you with these remarks given by Congressman Kennedy in response to recent proposals made by President Trump to defund legal services. Legal aid, it's not about a handout or a subsidy or a liberal pet project. It's about a lifeline for working families, an investment we make in people, not just because it's the good and decent thing to do, but because they will reinvest that capital back into our society 100 times down the line, in homes kept, families held together, communities strengthened, jobs saved, and lives lifted up. Thank you all. Good night.